In this tape I will be covering the TransformFX option. This tape is aimed at designers already familiar with HAL. I will cover the basics of the TransformFX option, but more detail can be found within the manual. Before watching this tape, you should have already seen the Paintbox Bravo training tape, which covers some of the basic painting functions. This tape will cover keyframeable curves, keyframeable effects, transform effects and filters. I'll begin by looking at some of the new features within curves. Curves can now be keyframed and could be used to produce a garbage matte. If we take this blue screen as an example, I could use curves to remove the piece of ribbon by firstly selecting the clip at the centre point of my desk. Now, if I go into curves, that clip can be found within curves. I can scroll through the clip using this timeline at the bottom. Now I want to get rid of the ribbon, so making sure I'm at the beginning of the timeline by using this arrow box, I will start to draw my curve. As I move through the clip, I will need to adjust the curve. Each time a point on the curve is moved, a keyframe move is applied. It is important not to add extra points as you go through the curve, as the curve will appear to jump. Always start with the right amount of points on your curve. Once the curve is finished, I can now choose a blue from the screen, change the brush size and indeed the brush, and now I can fill the curve with that colour. And now by pressing Do It, I can also process in fields by pressing the field box. For this particular example, I just want to process in frames, so turning the field box off and pressing Do It. Now going down to the desk, we will have the old version, and if I play out the new version, the ribbon has now been taken out of the image. If your system has the Spatial Dynamics option, you will have two extra boxes within the Curves menu. ALF Pause and ALF Point. ALF Pause allows a curve to be positioned following a single ALF point. ALF Point will draw a curve between the points of a 3 or 4 point track, allowing you to track triangles or squares, for example. In this example, I will show you how a curve can follow action in this clip. I want to highlight a specific player in the section of a hockey match. Firstly, I need to create my 1 point track using ALF. I can now take this clip into graphics by once again making sure that the clip is selected in the center point. Now we can see the clip is in graphics. If there are curves and keyframes already within curves, delete All will delete the curve and the keyframes. At the first frame, I will draw my curve. I want the curve open, and once I've drawn the curve, I can reposition and resize the shape around the player I have tracked. Now I can load the track information into my curve by pressing ALF pause. And now the curve will follow the tracking points All the tracking points have now been transferred into keyframe moves, and once again, Do It will process the result. Note that the clip with the track does not need to be selected as the background clip, as long as the clip is in the center position on the desk. And once again, let's play out the result. Within the Effects menu, all functions except filters are keyframeable. Let's start by taking a look at the colour corrector. Every colour correction within the colour menu now is keyframeable. So, if I want to apply a hue rotation onto this clip, which maybe starts at 0 at the beginning of the frame and goes all the way through to 360 at the end. This is now possible by simply scrolling along the timeline to the point where you want a keyframe and then adjusting the hue value accordingly. So by going to the end, entering in 360 degrees, the hue will rotate between frame 1 and frame 96. When a keyframe move has been made, an orange box will appear next to the menu. By tapping on this box, a graph will appear. These allow keyframe effects to be edited from beginning to end, frame by frame if necessary. Using these interactive graphs to create a path through the effect. When the graph is displayed, the white marker line indicates the current frame. This is also detailed in the green numeric box. By tapping down anywhere on the graph, this will prompt the white marker to jump. New points can be added to the graph by tapping on the line at the appropriate frame. These points can be dragged up and down to change the value, or left to right to move the keyframe. Now sometimes these graphs can get very complicated. So there is a zoom function that allows you to get in closer to gain more precise control of a certain point. This again is controlled by the pen. Tap down in the graph area and keeping the pen, drag the pen up to enlarge or down to reduce. Other sections of the graph can still be viewed by dragging the white line to the left or to the right. There are a number of additional controls for manipulating individual points on the graph. Tangential, allows the effect line to be controlled by tangent or normal lines. Pressing and dragging a normal point affects the line at that point in both amplitude and direction. Pressing and dragging tangent effects the curve emanating from that side of the current point. With linear highlighted, tapping down on a point will turn it to linear in and linear out. By selecting linear all of the points within the graph will now become linear. With curved highlighted, tapping down on an individual point will produce a curved keyframe in and out of the point. Curve all will apply a curved keyframe over all of the points simultaneously. Stop is used to add a stopped trajectory to a keyframe point. This means that movement into the selected point is linear, there is a pause at the stopped keyframe, and then movement is linear out of this point. Save is used to record the value of a selected point into a temporary buffer. By selecting Save and tapping on the point, that is now saved into the temporary buffer. To restore a buffer parameter of a single point, select Restore and tap on the specific point to be changed. Save All records all of the values in the graph into the temporary buffer. Original will return a single point to the default value, in this case 0. Original All will delete all keyframes and leave the first at the default value. This will only happen in this specific graph. Restore All will restore all of the saved values from the temporary buffer. To archive the parameters of a graph, exit the graph by tapping on the blue menu buffer, and now select Save, where a text keypad will appear. Name the graph and press End. The graph will now be saved to the library and can be recalled by finding the graphs from the library and simply fetching that will now recall the graph back into the effects menu. It is possible to work in all of the colour effects at the same time. So for example, I could apply some brightness changes. By tapping on the box to the right, I can control the brightness. I can execute my brightness changes, and in this case I'm just adjusting the brightness. Now I want the change to be on every other frame, so I can go into my graph now. Firstly, I want to make them all linear. Now by enlarging them, I want to make sure that the flash is on every second frame. So we can see the frame markers in the background, and just by pulling each point I can adjust the frame numbers. Notice the green box to the right is changing. It is also possible to make changes without even using the graphs, by making changes directly on the timeline. By stepping along the timeline by 2 increments, I can now change the brightness, and once again a keyframe move is being placed on the timeline every time a value is changed. So even if you don't want to use the graphs, it is still possible to make changes. If I now want to make another colour correction, maybe within the contrast menu, I can access any of the other colour menus by going into the graph and scrolling through this buffer. You will see all of the menus within the colour corrector can be accessed. When I'm happy with my colour correction, I can now process either within fields by selecting field or frame by deselecting field. To view, go to the clip desk where there will be an old and a new version which can be viewed. The blur function is now keyframeable, so a pull focus effect can be produced very quickly. You will notice that the keyframe moves from the previous demonstration of the colour corrector appear on the blur timeline. Although there aren't any keyframes set within blur because the graph box is not orange. If you want, you can use the keyframes as reference points by stepping through using this right-hand arrow. If not, you can delete them by selecting Delete and then Clear. This will delete any other keyframes set in any of the keyframeable menus. To produce my pull focus effect, I will enter the largest level of blur at frame 1, and then at the end frame I will take the blur down to 0. Once again, notice the graph box is now orange, alerting me that a keyframe move has been applied within blur. I can view the graph, which has exactly the same features as the colour graph. Indeed, all of the graphs within keyframeable effects have the same controls. Again, I can preview my effect by dragging along the graph. There is a smaller preview area, and when I'm happy with my result, I can process again in fields or frames. And this is the result. Within this option, we now have the ability to adjust the direction of the blur. By selecting DIR, this opens up a submenu. The numeric box to the right adjusts the direction in degrees. So by entering 45, I am now entering a level of 45 degrees of directional blur. Again, you can see the box to the right, which means this is also keyframeable. And once again, the graph can be edited in the same way you saw me doing within the colour menu. So maybe now what I'll do is I'll set up a direction from 0 all the way round 360 degrees. So going to the end of the timeline, setting up 360, placing that in the numeric box. So now we are going to go from a 0 degree blur to a 360. Just adjust that by dragging that down to 0. Once again, I have the choice of processing in fields or frames. Do All will process a single frame. Do Pen will process a smaller area. If a smaller area needs to be processed over a whole clip, Do Pen can be selected, an area drawn, and now by pressing Do It, this will process frame by frame that specific area, thus halving the processing time. Once again, the new result can be viewed from the clip desk. Streak enhances the effect. Here's an example of streak. And symmetrical will pull the effect in both directions. Other features within the effects menu that are keyframeable include Icon, Keyer, Grow and Mosaic. The Transform menu is also found within the Effects menu. It allows dramatic distortions to be applied to an image. These distortions are created by dividing up an image into multiple particles. Each particle is the equivalent of a single brush stamp. Transform examples and explanations together with a series of custom brushes are provided on the magneto-optical disc supplied with the system. When entering Transform, it is a good working practice to press Original All. This will set all of the values back to their default values. To delete any keyframe moves that have been applied, press Delete Clear. The image has now been divided up into brush particles. In this instance, the brush is a paintbrush. But of course, any other brush, including chalk, airbrush or custom brushes, may be used. When the current image is transformed into the default settings, the particles appear in a regular straight pattern. Selecting Hex allows the particles to be arranged into a hexagonal pattern. With Pick selected, the original image will appear through the gaps in the particles. If Pick is not selected, the gaps will be filled with the colour defined by the colour pot to the right. This can of course be changed by selecting a new colour from the palette and placing it in the paint pot. With Update selected, any changes in the parameters will update the image in real time. The green numeric boxes can be altered to adjust the pitch, which is the area around the particles, and also within the X and Y values, which allows you to control either the horizontal or the vertical spacing independently. Original can be used to reset individual parameter boxes by pressing on the specific name box. The size values will increase or decrease the size of the dots. If the dots overlap, another interesting effect can be gained by turning on Sort. Sort arranges the particles in order of luminance. The higher the luminance, the closer to the top of the image they will be placed. Sort will work differently if the stamps differ in size. You can make particles differ in size in a variety of ways. When the size box is selected, a further submenu is shown. This is the current value entered and can be altered by scrolling the pen. When I activate Random, I can determine the degree of randomness to be applied to the size of the brushes. So if I enter 50%, the particles will vary in size randomly above and below this figure by 50%. Now, a lot of the smaller brushes are hidden, so now if I use sort, this time it will work differently and will arrange the particles in order of size. Modulation alters the size of the particles in a more controlled manner. Again, if I enter 50, the size of the brushes will increase and decrease by 50%, but the pattern is determined by the period box. This defines the number of brush stamps over which the modulation is to be applied. 1 equals 1 brush stamp. So if I enter in 50 here, the brush stamps will modulate above and below the figure set by 50% over every 50 brush stamps. L and F stands for line repeat and frame repeat. When using modulation or random, the frame and line repeat functions can be used to give different results. Selecting L to use the line repeat function will cause the modulation to be the same pattern on each line, thus making columns of identical brush stamps. Here is an example of that over a whole clip. You can see only the change in hue will change the stamps. Selecting F, the field frame repeat, will cause subsequent frames to follow on the sequence, thus keeping the same pattern each frame. Again, here is a processed example. Notice how the pattern is the same each frame, only the movement in the clip gives the movement on the final piece. If neither line or frame are selected, the pattern will change each frame, producing a shifting pattern. Again, here is the result. You can see that the brush stamps are actually moving. The pattern is moving and changing each frame, producing this shifting effect. These work like on-off switches. You must make sure you turn off one before you turn on the other. Dither allows you to make the pattern irregular. The higher the value, the more irregular the pattern. Notice again the field frame function is available within this function. Offset can be used to shift the particles in a specific direction. This direction is controlled by these arrows. Notice once again that the random and modulation boxes, which work in exactly the same way as in pitch and size, are available within offset. Density allows the opacity of the particles to be controlled, and again this can be controlled using random or modulation, or both. And of course, all of these boxes can be adjusted in conjunction with each other to produce very, very interesting textures. It is possible to have variables set up in the value boxes for size, dither, offset and density. Now they are controlled by stencils. The standard method of applying stencils to an image is to use the stencil. However, the size, dither, offset and density controls can be controlled by stencil simply by highlighting the specific name box. So for example, if I draw a vignetted stencil going from white to black, I can now use this to alter the size of the dots by turning on the size name box. This is now altering the dots depending on the luminance levels within the stencil. So the more solid the stencil, the smaller the dots. The size variables can still be changed, and maybe sort could be used to again create interesting results. Also, the use sten can be used as well to bring through some of the old image. So all of these features can be used in conjunction to create interesting halftone effects. By using Hicon, for example, I can now use a halftone effect all over the image by turning on the size variable. Once again, I can increase the size variables to be set to produce some very interesting results. Dither, offset and density can all be controlled in this way. Using offset with a stencil can produce some great displacement results. I'm going to use this clip with this water ripple as my stencil. So firstly, by placing it over the top of my clip and producing a high contrast stencil, now going into TransformFX and entering a very small figure in both pitch and size, and setting the offset variable by turning on the name box and setting the variable from 0 to 10. This will now be offsetting the pixels depending on the luminance levels of the stencil. And this will produce a very, very natural looking result like this one here. All of the transform effects are keyframeable, so I can produce a transform from the original footage to maybe lots of particles. At frame 1, I want to make sure that I've got small pitch and size. Just turn off the offset there. And now at the end, I want to produce larger particles. This green box here allows me to control both the pitch and the size at the same time, so the values can be adjusted proportionally. Now I can maybe make the dots a bit dithered and a little bit bigger, and tapping down on the screen stops the screen from refreshing. Alternatively, you can turn off update, enter in your new figures and press do to see the result. Each numeric box has a keyframe graph attached, which is identical to the keyframes graphs that we saw earlier in the effects menu. And all of the functions can be accessed via this blue buffer. A single frame can be processed by pressing Do All. Do Pen will process a smaller area, and Do It will process the whole clip. You must have Update on when you process. So let's process this now. The smaller the pitch and the size, the longer the screen will take to process, because there are many, many more particles. However, as the particles get bigger, the process will become quicker. Once again, when I play out the result, I can point out the difference between not using F. The particle pattern is being updated each frame, causing the particles to jump around. Or with this example, we can see all that is happening are the dots are getting bigger. They are not jumping around, and only the hue and colour change in the original clip is changing the movement of the dots. In order to produce transitions, you can set up a background clip which can be used to reveal a transform effect between two clips. If I want a transition between these two clips, I can set the incoming clip, which is this one, as my background. And now I can produce a transform effect over the top of my other clip. So going into transform, I must firstly turn on the background function, and now I can set up my transform. First of all, clearing out all of my other transform effects before, and indeed my keyframe. At the beginning, I want the clip to be at video quality, so I'm going to enter in very small figures, firstly turning off update. So entering in a pitch size of 1 and size 1. Now at frame 35, I want the transition to start. So by going to that frame, I am now going to place a dummy keyframe in pitch, size, density and explode. And I do this by tapping on the relevant frame marker in each of the graphs. So no action will take place before these points. Now at frame 65, I want my incoming clip to be fully visible. So at this point, I can adjust the pitch, size, dither, and now also my explode, and also my density levels. Once again, I can view and preview the result by dragging along the timeline, and when I'm happy with my result, I can process. Again, I can use the graphs to edit where my particular points and particular effects will occur. And when happy, I can process. And here is the finished example. Explode is used to create an effect which you've just seen. We just take a look at Explode. It allows you to push the particles out from a selected point. So for example, here it's going from the centre point. Positive percentage will explode the particles out, and a negative percentage will make them implode. Selecting X and Y will allow you to reposition the position of the explode on the screen. So I can make it explode maybe from the centre of the woman's earring. So now the point of explosion has changed. Do remember that any brush, including custom brushes, could be used for any of these examples that I've just shown you. Any transform effects can be archived by selecting Save and titling them. And of course, they can be brought in from the system by finding the graphs for the particular section and fetching them in. Filters are used to alter images or sections of images by creating new textures based on values in that image. This is achieved by processing the luminance values of individual pixels that make up an image by mixing each pixel value with neighbouring pixels. Several filters have been included as standard on this software. To find the filters, search for filters in the library and simply fetch in the filters. This will actually bring them into the buffer within filters. So return to filters and scroll through to see all of the new filters that you've just brought in. If you don't want a particular filter, you can press lose and the filter will be lost from the buffer, although it will not be deleted from the original system disk library. To view the specific filter, just tap the pen onto the picture area, where you will get a preview. It is not necessary to know how these filters are created to use them. However, if you wish to create your own custom filters, this is possible by selecting Custom from within this buffer. Custom will always be in this buffer, even if no other filters are loaded. When selected, a matrix appears with a larger menu. All images contain pixels with their own set of luminance levels. Each of these numeric values in the matrix relates to a specific pixel. The center position in any matrix is the weighting for the original pixel. The values around that center pixel are added or removed from the center pixel to create a new value. The best way to show you is to show you on a single pixel image, like this one here. There are three sized matrices, and I will start by looking at the 3x3 matrix. When Custom is selected, the values that appear in the matrix are the values of the last filter used. So, if I go to Diagonal Weave and now go back to Custom, these are the values from diagonal weave. Using the existing values from a predefined filter is a good way of experimenting. You can see here there is a pattern within the matrix, and when applied to the pixel you can see the pattern occurring. The positive figures produce a lighter luminance and the negative figures produce a darker luminance. So I can now adjust the figures to change the pattern, but let's maybe do this within the 5x5 matrix. I'm going to make a cross. To change the figures, simply tap on the box to open up a keypad and enter the desired figure. With SIM-H and SIM-V active, the figures will be entered in regular patterns, thus making it quicker to change the matrices. Now if I tap down on the pixel, you will see how the new values have been included, now producing a cross-shaped pattern. The green box to the right of the normal box sets the normal value. This box, when turned on, makes sure that no value exceeds the luminance values within the original image. Therefore, it is a good idea to work with it, although some interesting effects can be gained with normal turned off. Here are a few examples of some filters using some of the predefined filters. The TFX package is an option on the HAL. When you purchase this option, you will gain keyframeable curves, keyframeable effects, transform effects and filters.